Hey everybody, this is Kid Hero, and today I wanted to give you a update regarding the video game event that I had sponsored actually 2 weeks ago and last week, and give you uh, kind of some of the things that I learned, as well as the really good things, the really bad. Well, not really. There weren't really any bad things, but just to kind of give you a feel of what you can take away from my experience. Now, I actually did create a video for this. The reason why I'm not going to show you the video that I created is I actually don't have official permission. I'm not sure if it's something that I will be able to show. And again, some issues that you may run into, which I will end up speaking about today, just so you can hopefully, gain a little bit of experience and learn from working with different organizations. That way, you'll have very clear expectations on your end, and the people that you're assisting, whether it's children, adults, or the other organizations' expectations can be met as well. So, to kind of, yeah, I got my new hat on today. So, this is my adulting hat, literally. But to kind of give you a summary real quick of what happened was I wanted to sponsor a open gaming event at a local middle school, and we'll go into how much it cost or how much I sponsored, everything that I purchased, and everything else that I can include. That way, if you're interested in doing this in your area, you'll be able to learn from yourself. So the organization or the event was set up by a few individuals at the site. My responsibility as a sponsor was not only getting an understanding of roughly what the event would be, what it is that I, as a sponsor, would be able to provide, and kind of what they were looking for as far as getting things out of it. So, to just start things out, we will start with the cost. And I would love to share the screen, but there's actually very sensitive information on the screen. So I'm actually just going to read off of what exactly that I purchased. So I had purchased 2 digital copies of video games, which I presented to people at the school. If I can bring it up here, there we go. I purchased 1 digital copy of Super Smash Brothers Ultimate, 1 digital copy of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Both of these were delivered via digital code. That way they could be installed on the school's Nintendo Switches, as well as some micro USB cables. There was a little bit of a challenge with the original controls that were purchased. And the reason why, if I can show you a example video game controller, for the Nintendo Switch, this is obviously a PlayStation controller, but usually on these controllers, they have this particular charging port located on the back side of the controller. So if I'm holding the controller here, the back side of the controller would be facing away from me, and you plug the cable in through that little hole. If you own any sort of system that uses a detachable or wireless controller, you're quite familiar with this, so I won't bore you with that detail. However, on the proprietary or third-party controllers that were purchased, they're actually inset into the controller. So the original, which I'll show you, the charging cable, they use a USB-C. They were originally embedded into the actual controller, and the charging cables that I had actually ordered off of Amazon were very thick. And initially, I had spoken to the representative at the school site to see what they wanted to do. We did attempt to cut the aluminum band off to see if it would fit in. It definitely did fit in. However, the amount of time that it took in order to make sure that it did properly fit, and I'm trying to remember how many of those cables that I bought. I think I purchased 9 cables, and to do one was, I want to say, about 10 minutes. So I wasn't overtly excited about doing 8 more, and it just seemed better off that way we would know that the quality of the cables would be preserved. I just went out and purchased new remotes. That way they would work for what they needed. And to kind of, again, show you, there used to be aluminum band on this side right here that was similar to the USB side. And because the band stuck out so far, they actually didn't fit into the actual plug-in port on the Nintendo Switch controllers. The Switch controller was actually a full-size gaming controller, and it did not fit. So I ended up purchasing some from a local electronics store, and it worked out really well. So I purchased, I believe, I'm trying to remember, I purchased at least 4 controllers and 2 hub docks for the Nintendo Switches. So we have 2 hub docks, the controllers, 2 digital copies of video games Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. And for yesterday, which was Saturday, and the Saturday before, I also did buy donuts for the students. That way, if they hadn't had breakfast before they came, they had a chance to have Krispy Kreme donuts when they arrive. That way, they would at least have something. And I think a little bit of focus fuel, if you want to call it that, having at least making sure that the kids are fed. Obviously, donuts aren't the most most healthy thing to offer, but I still think it's important that if you're throwing any sort of a event and you're having guests come, if there's something that they can casually enjoy, it actually improves the experience tremendously. And I'm trying to remember, since I don't normally go to Krispy Kreme too terribly often, the Krispy Kreme donuts, I believe, were roughly $12.99 or $13 for a dozen. And I think that's actually a baker's dozen, which is 13 donuts. When I had gone a week ago from Saturday, they actually gave me minis, which wasn't exactly what I wanted. They were out of the normal donuts, but they actually gave me extra ones, which was fine. So it worked out really well. So the first time I went, I believe I spent roughly about $30, and I ended up getting about 36-ish donuts. 29, 26, 39 donuts. And then the second time I went, I got 2 baker's dozen for $26. So a combined total of what I had spent was roughly about, let's add this up. 80.31 plus $64.07 is $144.38. $144.38 plus another $64.19. Roughly, I would say about ballpark $250 to $270 for both events. I didn't need to purchase any more games because they're permanently there for the students to enjoy. Minus, obviously, once the donuts are consumed, they can't be consumed again in the future. But as long as the software and the gaming controllers are there at the school, and they do decide to provide this event in the future, the students will be able to benefit from it. So, what did I learn? Well, just one moment. Let me take a sip of my Red Bull real quick. Thank you. So, what did I learn? Learned quite a bit. And again, I had mentioned this in a previous live stream. If you're interested in throwing an event, there's particular things that you do want to make sure kind of smoothed out. Again, since we were holding the event at the site at the school on the weekend, I would say the first thing that's most important is making sure that you can get access to wherever it is that you're holding the event. This can be extremely important when you're actually renting, say, a rental hall or renting a building. Making sure that if there is what's called a MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, or the contract for the lease agreement for the site that you're holding, making sure that there's an understanding of who will have keys in order to get in. I notice in my experience with seeing other people throw events or going to events, uh, this can be the biggest issue that most people endure when throwing an event. And the main reason is because the small things can be easily forgotten. And I don't think that's necessarily anyone's fault. Just understanding if someone needs to be contacted, who can be called, whether it's the manager on site of the rental hall, the owner, at exactly what time you will get access to the building. So say if your event at your rental hall will start at 5 p.m., making sure that in the rental agreement that it's written in there, you'll have access at 4 p.m. That way you can get in, set up everything, decorate and whatnot. So there was a minor incident where, trying to get access to the building, but in general, it's just one of those things. It's a first time event, so there are going to be these type of occurrences, if you want to call it that, that will happen. And I don't think it's necessarily anyone's fault. I think the benefit that we were providing the students definitely outweighs everything else. So making sure that the students are comfortable when doing the event is especially important. So going on. So we know roughly how much I paid. What else did I learn? I think when you're throwing any sort of gaming event, especially if it's a open gym style gaming event versus a competitive event, making sure that all your guests, clients, patrons feel comfortable while they're there. This can be extremely difficult when you are working with a massive amount of students. Say, for example, if you're throwing a video game tournament that has 50 competitors and the amount of actual people watching is in the hundreds, being able to speak to all those people, excuse me, to make sure that they're having a good time is nearly impossible unless you have the staff to really, do that. Obviously, I think when you start dealing with extremely large numbers, being able to have that level of customer service is extremely difficult. However, I think if you truly value the opinions of your guests, at least being out there in the crowd, if you want to call it that, being able to have minor conversation, asking questions. It's kind of like if you go to a restaurant and you have the restaurant manager or the store owner stopping by when you go to pay for your tab, asking if the food is okay, do you need extra coffee or anything else. I think what can be determined as the equivalent of doing that when you have a massive tournament is checking on your frontline staff or your frontline volunteers. And the reason why I say this is your frontline personnel are going to be the most important people in your organization. It doesn't matter if you're doing sales, if you run a store, or, a bar, if you're running a video game tournament or event, the people that are in contact with your customers the majority of the time are going to be they not only represent the face of your organization, but also they'll be able to identify where all the problems are in your organization. That's extremely important to do. And Unfortunately, when organizations get extremely big, it can be one of the things that are often overlooked, but it's extremely, extremely, extremely necessary. Let me see. So again, if you end up hopping on here mid stream, I'm Kid Hero. I recently sponsored a open gaming event at a public school. We're just kind of doing a debriefing, discussing all the things that happened. We just covered cost as far as what I spent to sponsor the individual Saturdays. There's been 2 so far. We're planning on doing 2 remaining ones next Saturday and one last Saturday before the end of the school year. And I just wanted to be able to not only answer any questions, but also present this information just in case if anyone was wanting to do this. So what else did I learn? I think when viewing the different students or the different guests that came to the event, there are students that have particular interests in games. I think that's one of the great things about video games is there's plenty of variety. Obviously, when throwing something that is kind of an open event, making sure that the games are appropriate, but also offering games that students will be interested in is very important. And an example would be obviously having a event at a public school offering GTA 5 as cool as it would probably be a video game that would not be appropriate in the atmosphere. However, offering games that could be more suited for the locations such as Smash Brothers, such as Mario Kart, that not only promote that slightly competitive spirit, but also be friendly and appropriate for the clientele that are coming. So that was one thing. And viewing the students as they watch or as they're actually playing to see the different types of students. Obviously, all the students that end up coming to your event, regardless of, let's say, all the guests that end up coming to your event, they're not going to know each other. And that's just like an average day at school. While students may go to the same school, they may be in the same class, they're not going to necessarily be on speaking terms. And what I mean by speaking terms is they may or may not know other students' names in class. They can remember their face. However, knowing exactly who they are, what that's like, they may not be on the actual first name basis, know what the other students' name are, or have ever spoken with them before. So you may occasionally have either guests, clients, or students at your event that are in some way intimidated because it's kind of like um, a social division. It's just, some students, some guests are introverts, and while they may also want to participate in the same game, they may feel a little awkward about sitting down at the group and playing the game as well. I think that would be a great opportunity, especially for those that are hosting the event, to introduce students. If it's being hosted by parents, teachers, maybe someone, in the dean, assistant dean, principal. If you're at least familiar with the students that are coming, and usually these students are usually predetermined by permission slips that have been provided back, it would be a good opportunity to introduce students to other students. That way, it's like, hey, Johnny, I want to introduce you to Sam over here or Jessica over here. She really likes Smash Brothers, or she really likes Brawlhalla or Mario Kart. And I thought, if the two of you have time, you may want to play a game together, start something off casual just like that. I hear Johnny's pretty good at. I hear Johnny's pretty good at Smash Bros. Now I've seen, Jessica over here. She's, you know, she's been undefeated every time I've seen her. It's not necessarily that you're going to trash talk for the kids, but I think it's a good opportunity to compliment them on their success. Be like, hey, you don't even have to point fingers. You could just be like, hey, I sat down and played Jessica at Brawlhalla. She stomped me 3-0. As being an adult gamer, I can at least, legitimize her skill depending upon if the student is an extrovert. He may want to like, oh, I'm pretty good at this game too. So if she has some skills, let me grab the sticks and, do a little bit of competitiveness. For introverts, I would totally use a different method. You can use a less competitive game or have a cooperative game, depending upon the game that you're going to offer your students, or just make it a fun atmosphere. And that was really what we focused on when providing the event, is just making sure that all students felt welcome, providing them with a fun atmosphere where everyone felt comfortable. I walked around and had an opportunity to speak with some of the students. I was like, hey, did you have breakfast? I have free donuts right here. They would take a donut. And I would say, so out of all these games that we may play today, what game are you looking forward to playing? Showing interest in them. And I think that's an extremely important skill to have, especially if you're a teacher, a mentor, a parent, a sibling, is showing interest in, the other person. I think it's a underutilized tool when you show interest in other people, whether they're older or younger. You're providing them not only with a voice, but also a opportunity to really speak about themselves. And I know some people can feel very uncomfortable. Again, if you're an introvert, if depending upon, how in your personal experiences in the past, you may not want to put all your business out there. And again, I think that's one of the things that you have to be very careful about, is some people, whether old or young, they just need to get a opportunity to feel comfortable. And I don't think it's necessarily something that you necessarily need to push, especially with working with introverted guests, introverted clients or students. I think if you at least provide them with the reassurance that if they ever need to speak to you about anything, then you can at least provide them with an ear to listen to. Not necessarily an opportunity to pass judgment on them, but it's like, hey, if you have something that you're concerned about, you can always come to me and speak to me about it. It's one of those things to where, if we go back to what everybody wants, everyone wants to feel safe, everyone wants to feel accepted. And I think most people aren't creatures of logic. We're kind of creatures of emotion. And, whether good or bad, we all have the tendency to react in certain situations, but making sure that people feel comfortable when providing these types of events or experiences is extremely important, especially when working with youth. Was it hard? Uh, honestly, for me, it wasn't. It was one of those things where I've sponsored other events in the past that this wasn't a big deal. I was only casually working this event compared to other events where I've been frontline. Fortunately, the site staff that were working the event, they took care of the majority of the work. They did the setup, they did the permission slips for the students. They made sure everything was cleaned up after I left, and I actually had to leave early, which I noted in the video I created. And I think one of the benefits of being a sponsor is you have a little bit less responsibility. And I know that can sound a little bit, beneficial as well as selfish in some ways. And when you're doing any kind of event, whether it's large scale or small scale, depending upon the scope of the people that you're supporting, occasionally, finding the finances to make those events possible can be the most difficult thing. Obviously, since I've sponsored other videos in the past, spending the $260 to have 27 combined 27 students, I believe it was roughly 10 to 12 the first Saturday, and then 12 to 15 the second Saturday, so that'd be combined 25 students. Spending the 260 or so dollars really wasn't a big deal. I think it was for a very good cause, and to see the kids not only having a positive atmosphere where they could just be themselves, play some video games, possibly make some new friends, and have a good time in a safe environment for 3 hours at a time, I would definitely sponsor it again without hesitation. I think it's important to also review if you are going to, be sponsoring lots of different events in the future. That way you can see if your money is actually going to a good cause. We can get into that in a future discussion. In regards to providing restricted funds, semi-restricted funds, or unrestricted funds. I'll give you a quick summary. Restricted funds means that the money can only be spent on whatever that you specify. This could be required either through a MOU or a contract, meaning if the person doesn't spend the money according to the agreement that you provide, they're actually obligated to pay you back. This isn't really a big deal when you're messing with smaller amounts of money. And again, I don't want to make this seem like $260 was nothing, but if I donated $260 to an organization, there's a very low chance that I'll make it a restricted fund unless, of course, I specifically ask them, what are you going to buy with it? They tell me what they need or what they want. I'll go buy it myself, and then I keep the receipt, and then they use whatever items or equipment there is. So in that case, that would be what's called restricted funds or restricted grant. Semi-restricted would be there could be partial restrictions on what can and can't be purchased, or there would be a timeline involved with when that money had to be spent. And of course, unrestricted funds would be basically, I give you the money, you can spend it on what you want, but there's still that obligation of trust that's involved with the sponsor and the person throwing the grant or throwing the event. Excuse me. So let's go on. Was it hard? I'm trying to think of anything else that's difficult. It started at 9 a.m. both Saturdays. It wasn't overly difficult because I normally wake up by about 5 or 6 o'clock every day. I'm kind of an early bird. I like to get things started. And even if, I'm not planning on leaving the house early, generally speaking, I'm still up early just because even though sleep is great, I like to feel as if I have time to use, whether I decide to spend that time, doing something important, spend that time relaxing. Maybe some days where I feel especially tired, I may take a nap. It can be extremely useful to have that option because you can allocate that time as necessary. Were there anything other than that was difficult? No, not really. I think in the future, to make sure that it's as easy as possible, I'll probably meet with the individuals that are, again, on the front line. Your frontline individuals are the most important, being the dean and the two employees of the school. Um, I briefly mentioned to both of them in passing yesterday that if they needed anything as far as the equipment, I believe the teacher said that he needed or would like a portable whiteboard. I told him if he was really serious about it, come speak to me about it, and I would make sure that he gets the equipment. And that was mainly because he was heavily considering creating a bracket tournament and being able to draw the brackets on the whiteboard as well as having the students put their name up there for easy tracking purposes would make it a lot easier versus using paper or anything like that. So that's something that I would probably discuss in the future. Again, that can be covered during a debriefing with your frontline people, whoever is actually hosting the event. If this was a internal thing where I was in charge of several people who are running the event, we would sit down and have either a business meeting or business debriefing regards to the event. It would be an opportunity to say, okay, what did you notice that was great? We would start off with that. One thing that would possibly said after having these two specific Saturdays with the kids coming was the kids definitely came. They started off with I believe, 15 to 20 permission slips going out. That first time, I believe it was roughly 10 that came back, or maybe 12 that came back, and then the students showed up on that day were roughly 10 students. Yesterday, it was roughly about 12 to 15 total. So since it was the first time and second time holding the event, there was actually a response from the students. The students showed interest and they consistently showed up on both Saturdays when they could be spending their Saturday at home sleeping, maybe watching Saturday morning cartoons, or, hanging out with friends, playing video games at home. So I would say that would warrant the positive note during the debriefing. After all the positive things were actually said by each of the people who work the event, it's really important to write this stuff down. If in your group you have a quote unquote secretary or someone that writes down the meeting notes, because if this is something that you do once a year, it's really important to write down all this information with all the activity that goes on either when you're handling normal business. It's good to be able to reflect back on these notes. That way, you can use it not only as a performance metric for, okay, last year, the first day, we had 10 students. The second weekend, we had 12 to 15. If we end up doing it again 1 year from now, making sure that we hit that same performance metric of the same amount of students coming, That way we actually have something that we can compare. If it wasn't as successful, then we can actually double check to see what did we do differently. Maybe we tried a different advertising method than before. So if this year we paid actual, or like a radio station that was saying, hey, if you want to come play video games Saturday, May 7th, be here at, such and such time, versus, the informal way, sending out permission slips. Maybe the students forget to tell their parents about it, or parents get busy, they can't get rides. There could be all sorts of different reasoning for why people don't show up to your event, but that's one of those things that you write down. All the good stuff, all the bad stuff, you want to write that down on paper. That way you can actually compare it to something else. Not only every time you do that event, you can compare it to whatever your best performance was, as well as your worst performance. What could have been improved? At times during a meeting, it may be exceptionally hard for people to hear criticism, but I think if you have an understanding amongst your group that you all want to improve, it's important to bring up those topics of what went wrong, and then you can table how to go about fixing it for another day. So, say for example, if by chance, let's say on that first Saturday, only one student shows up or only 5 students show up, it can be very frustrating, and it can make you question whether or not you should continue to do the event in the future. Um, Especially during those first few days, you're providing a service that's new. And I think it's important to actually, you want to actually fairly judge the outcomes. So while performance may not be there, whether good or bad, I think it's extremely important to be fair. So let's say if last Saturday and yesterday only one student showed up or only 2 students showed up, I think it would be really important to then speak with the students that you passed out permission slips to, or passed out. You could give the parents a call. Maybe the parents didn't want to drop their students off because the event was so new or so unusual. They didn't think it was actually a thing. They weren't sure, the legitimacy, who would actually be there, who's hosting the event. It's a way to not only provide more information to the guests of the event. Maybe parents didn't think they were allowed to come, and you can be like, hey, if you want to come play video games with your kid, you're more than welcome to come. From a event coordinator perspective, I would look at that as, free help or volunteers. Having a extra set of eyes, especially if you have higher numbers, may be worth considering. The other option is for the students that actually want to go, or guests that want to have guests that want to go. They may not have transportation to actually go to your event. So while it may not be specifically your fault as, being the event coordinator, the host, the sponsor, it is one of those problematic things that I did discuss in a previous live stream, was how to properly throw any sort of event, and making sure that your clientele, your guests, can actually come to that event is just as important as the atmosphere, the nature of the event, and understanding if people even want to go to your event. So having that, here, I'll even add that as a banner thing. Add banner. We'll put that right there. There we go. debriefing is extremely important. Being able to honestly critique what it is that you're doing versus just doing it willy-nilly. In my particular case with sponsoring this particular type of event, as a sponsor, it's important to ask if you're able to attend the event. Some people would say, as being a sponsor, I should be able to go to the event for free. That may not always be the case, depending upon the types of events or who the clientele or guests are. And I'll give a perfect example of that. And this could actually be, we'll put this back into Was It Hard? Imagine for a second if I wasn't sponsoring a video game event, but sponsoring, let's say, if it was a feast or a celebration for improvement within the organization. Let's not use public schools as the example. So let's say this is okay. I actually thought of a perfect example. A few years ago, before the bug was actually a thing, I was sponsoring, I believe, a woman's shelter, and it was often something that I would do on an annual basis. To give you a little bit of background and understanding of this particular shelter, women and only women and children could stay at this shelter. No men could stay at this shelter. And the reason why, the shelter offered either free housing for victims of physical or emotional circumstances. So, because of the importance of preserving not only security, but also having the positive atmosphere as well as the recovery from possible trauma, no men were actually allowed on the premise. That's during normal business hours. That's during specifically those events for those specific guests or those clientele. In that particular circumstance, it would be very wrong, either for myself or for whoever was sponsoring those events. It is the responsibility of the hosting organization to explain that to your sponsor, because if you fail to explain that to your sponsor may not sponsor you again in the future. It's not that necessarily they don't care about your cause, but it's more so it looks as if you're unorganized, or the lack of communication or being upfront about the information on who is allowed at the event and who's not. In that particular case, I still sponsored the event even though I wasn't allowed to go. They did show me after the fact pictures of certain individuals that had okayed their picture being taken for internal use only. However, for some of those individuals, clients or guests, they even have what's called, restraining orders, and they're under protection from either public servants or law enforcement. So those individuals wouldn't have their pictures taken, but it actually allows me as the sponsor to be able to see how my money was spent, or how the sponsor's money was spent. It can be extremely useful, but as someone that is throwing that particular type of event, it's important to be upfront with either your organization's policies, your expectations from the sponsor. Are you going to allow them to come to the event? Are they not allowed? Does the sponsor have the ability to, restrict the funds to any specific purchase? Are you just looking for unrestricted funds? If you're just looking for unrestricted funds, you may come across some challenges with finding sponsors that want to sponsor large quantities of money. But it is extremely important to be upfront and let them know your expectations of how they can help you. I think if you provide that information to your sponsor, as well as if it's possible for them to come, that they're more likely to not only see the impact that you're providing and to be um, a long-term sponsor or long-term um, donor, which is extremely important. Funny stories. One funny story that I can actually think of right offhand was it was towards the beginning of the event, and I had just started walking around. I had, my box or 2 boxes of Krispy Kreme donuts. I had noticed that some students immediately upon seeing that there was food, they came over and asked, hey, is this food free? Can I have some? Yeah, sure. Yes, you may. And then there were other students that didn't come up just because they either didn't feel comfortable, they didn't know. So I made sure that I approached each of the students to not only introduce myself. Hey, would you like a donut? I brought donuts. Are you hungry? Would you like some? There were 4 people playing Smash Brothers Ultimate, and I was on the far left. And I came up to the student. I was like, hey, how are you doing, young man? Would you like a donut? Have you had breakfast this morning? And he paused the game, he grabbed a donut, he put the donut in his mouth, put his hand back on the other side of the controller, unpaused it without saying anything to the other 3 people were playing, and then started beating up on them. And everyone else is like, hey, hey, hey. So someone else paused the button. All the other students got their donuts and they continued playing and having a good time. I thought this was extremely funny just because it's one of those things where if you feel extremely comfortable, that's just one of the things that tends to happen amongst really good friends. Um, just, being able to casually pause mid fight. If I were, playing a game, casually pause mid fight, take a drink of my soda, unpause without saying anything, and then all of a sudden I have an advantage, and then everyone else is, a little bit upset. But it was just one of those things with, gamer etiquette. It's supposed to be a casual space. It wasn't that big deal. Everyone got free donuts and everyone was happy. It was a good experience. That was one of the funnier experiences that I can remember immediately. It was actually really cool to speak with not only the dean, but also also the employees on site to kind of gauge what their experience was like playing video games, and got a really interesting story that I hope to share in the future with his gaming experience. So it was really cool. Questions. So we've been going for about 50 minutes here. I know there have been some very specific things that I have covered as far as doing this particular type of event. If by chance you're interested in doing this yourself, or if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to leave a comment down in the comment section. If I can provide any information that can help you do something similar in your area, I want to make myself available. Uh, I have had quite a bit of experience with throwing different types of events, fundraisers, open events for clients, guests, students that range from small to moderate to large being over 100 students. There are different challenges when you start to go to different tiers, working with having more guess at that. If you have any questions, just leave a comment down in the comment section. I will get to your question and I can either answer it during the live stream, kind of like this, or if it's something easy to explain, I can respond back in your comment. If you found this useful, definitely hit the like button. I appreciate everyone hanging out. And if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. I hope you had an awesome weekend. This is Kid Hero.